There are strokes that drive you forwards, backwards, sideways, and spinning. All have their appropriate applications and variations. Also, each stroke has a different effect from when the boat is stationary to when it is in motion. Firstly, let's work on some basic orientation with the strokes. Any stroke you take is going to cause some amount of spin in the boat. It is inherent in the design of the whitewater boat to spin. The idea is that the further you get the blade from the boat, the more spin you will generate, and the closer the blade is to the boat, the less spin occurs. But this also goes a step further. As you watch this stroke, the boat spins more as the paddle passes the midpoint of the boat. So there are two things that can cause the boat to spin: the distance from the boat the paddle is, as well as the travel along the side of the boat. This concept works fine being stationary, but how about as the boat is being paddled? As the boat is paddled, whether it be forward or backward, the boat is plowing through the water and creating a pivot point. Essentially, this point is attached to the water through resistance, and the remainder of the boat behind it moves freely. This means that strokes occurring on the front half of the boat will cause the boat to accelerate, and the strokes that occur past the pivot point or the wake of the boat are used more as correction or maintenance. Did you follow all that? Good, because the physics that occur typically relate to the common pitfalls we experience with our strokes. Considering most beginner and intermediate struggle to keep their boats straight, let's start with the sweep stroke, as they typically are corrective in nature. This is also the most effective stroke to teach folks the concept of torso rotation, as it uses the most. The common problem with the sweep stroke is the orientation of the paddle, whether it is horizontal or vertical. The more horizontal the paddle, the further the reach of the paddle blade and the wider the stroke. Typically, folks pay little to no attention to the paddle orientation and try correcting or turning through longer strokes, and although they are getting their blade past the frontal pivot point, a wider stroke would be far more effective. Relaxing your grip on the paddle will allow for easier paddle dexterity and still allow you to achieve the reach you need to get that wide stroke in the water. Check how this paddler is over gripping the paddle and how it inhibits the ability to get the necessary reach while keeping the paddle angle low. Another common problem is getting the lower half to wake up, better known as torso rotation. If we are only using our arms for our strokes, we are limiting the amount of power that can be translated into the boat. After all, it's the lower half of the body that is in contact with the boat. When taking your stroke, engage the foot on the same side you are taking your stroke on, and think of pushing your foot away from the paddle blade. You feel the power now generating from the lower core. Do this a few more times, and pay attention to what is happening, and you will notice your pelvis twists as well, and that the torso rotation happens from a much lower region. When you start to engage the lower half of your body, you also generate a great deal of stability. Have the lower half asleep and watch your stability falter. So where the sweep stroke got the paddler to focus on torso rotation from the lower half, the forward stroke gets the paddler to focus on the rotation from the upper half or in the shoulders. The struggle with the forward stroke is in getting the reach near the front of the boat, in front of the pivot point, to create good forward acceleration, all while keeping the paddle vertical. Sitting upright and reaching forward with not only your arm, but your shoulder on the stroking side gives the paddler good initial rotation or wind up. As the paddler takes the stroke, it is important to then focus on the unwind from the lower torso or pelvis, as well as the rotation in the shoulders. A clear indication that this is not happening is where the top hand punches through too much and causes the paddle blade to scoop, meaning the power is primarily being generated from the arms. This, however, is a hard thing to maintain over time, and as the kayak gets up to speed and gains some directional stability, our strokes will lengthen and widen a bit. Draw strokes, by definition, are strokes that are being pulled towards the boat, and the most effective draws have your paddle near vertical. The draw stroke that you most often use without ever knowing is the stern draw. The stern draw is by far the king of correction strokes that control veer, and are also a great way to maintain momentum across the current. Although a stern draw very much resembles the last half of a sweep stroke, it goes a bit further. Take notice that when the stern begins to slide out on the paddler here, he reaches out to take a wide sweeping stroke to correct. However, the difference here is the punching through of the top hand to make the paddle more vertical and effectively changing the angle of the blade, pulling it towards the stern of the boat. Simultaneously, the paddler picks up their stern towards the paddle blade to help slide the stern back on course. Just like the sweep stroke, it is important to engage the lower half to promote an engaged core and better balance. The stern draw is not to be mistaken as a rudder, as the resistance of the stroke is on the power face, not on the back face of the paddle. The bow draw is less used as correction and more for control while accelerating in front of the pivot point of the boat. The paddler uses the draw stroke to redirect momentum by leading the draw directly into forward strokes to maintain momentum. The bow draw encourages the boat to turn, where the stern draw generally is limiting the spin in the kayak. This stroke, however, is commonly overused and at inappropriate times, providing a false sense of momentum. It also turns into a bit more of a hanging draw or brace for a lot of folks, and actually loses its stroke quality entirely when used as such. When executing the draw stroke, just like any other stroke, it is important to note that the lower half of the body still plays an active role as the body twists to plant the blade, and the knee on the opposite side of the stroke pulls toward the open face of the blade. This makes you more stable as it taps into the power of the core again. Take the time to play with these strokes on flat water, as well as mild current, to get a good feel for them. A nice low-stress environment where distractions are at a minimum are best for focused practice. These fundamental strokes are what take you through flat water all the way to Class 5.